Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew. Marie, how you doing?
I'm doing good. We're honing in on just a couple weeks from now. It's a big day, right?
Absolutely. Very big day. Super excited about it. And today we are joined by two very special guests who we are extremely excited to have on here. So we are actually joined by the High Priest and Priestess of the Church of Satan. So guys, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Peggy Nadramia. I'm the High Priestess of the Church of Satan.
And I'm Peter H. Gilmore, and I'm the High Priest. I've been that since 2001, and Peggy's been the High Priestess since 2002.
All right. So great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on. We were kind of, we've always been, we follow your Twitter account. I especially follow the Twitter account and I love it. The snark is on point. It's super good. So,
thank you. We'll pass that on.
Yeah, absolutely. Please let them know they're doing a great job. They're really doing a wonderful thing. I love it. All the, man, you guys get a lot of hate mail, even hate Twitter, I should say.
But that just keeps going with what we've had since the beginning of the organization.
That's true. I mean, we've received, I'm working with the Church of Satan archives right now, and I can assure you that we've been receiving that via the postal mail ever since the very beginning of the church.
And if it was earlier, they'd probably be coming via Pony Express.
Right, sure, yeah. I mean, So I guess just for our listeners' sake, because I think one thing that always kind of surprised me reading about kind of the Church of Satan and as it currently exists and sort of the history and everything is, I think the public has one of two misconceptions, right? There's the first misconception, which is, Satanism is this whatever black magic evil kind of thing, right? The sort of D&D view, I guess I would call it. And then you have the more, I guess.
Way to go, Chris.
Thank you.
To take out half of the audience right out of the gate. There's our hate mail right there.
Making fun of Dungeons and Dragons, not great for our people.
I'm sure there are enlightened players of D&D.
Oh, there absolutely are, of course. And then you have the other group, I guess, which I guess I kind of belong to myself before really digging in a bit, which is the idea that the Church of Satan or Satanism generally as a kind of collected group today is more of a materialist sort of society. What I mean by that is the kind of philosophical view of materialism where metaphysics is sort of an old, tired viewpoint. It has no place in the modern world. Much more of kind of a humanist society, I suppose. But reading some of the articles you sent and also just some articles generally, it's interesting to me how much emphasis is actually placed on ritual performance and also on, you call it yourself magic, I guess, but for lack of a better term, right? That's kind of, the imposition or the use of will in a ritualized way or something. Do you want to kind of, just for the listener's sake, can you kind of expand on that? Like what is...
Well, yeah, let me just hit with like what we would present as a basic definition of ourselves.
Sure.
And we basically would point out that Satanism is an atheist philosophy. And Satan is employed as a symbol which stands for pride, liberty, and individualism above all. We're pragmatic, skeptical, and we are definitely materialist. We don't embrace faith. We're not spiritual in any sense. And Anton LaVey termed this the world's first carnal religion, and it accepts man as an animal, just like all the rest, but who's a species that sometimes can be better or often worse than the others. We challenge our adherents to form their own personal hierarchy of values and to be responsible for their own lives, both the successes and failures. And that range tends to be off-putting for a lot of people who would rather blame someone or something else for the condition of their lives. So we want to get it down to the idea of ritual and such. Actually, I think when we have a lot of interesting pictures, and especially historical ones that are Anton LaVey wearing horns, and we have wonderfully naked women altars and all this kind of stuff.
And people tend to stop there.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem, is that a lot of folks don't bother reading any of the literature. They just look at the pictures or the videos and go, wow, look at all this ritual stuff. And part of our problem over the years, and Anton LaVey found it the same way, was that when he started the Church of Satan, that he called it stuffed rat and tombstone kind of appearance.
Right.
And that journalists are like, well, I want the sexy stuff. I want to see the naked altars, and I want everybody dressed in capes and lighting candles and ringing gongs. And for myself, since I've been representing this organization for over 20 years, I stopped doing that after a while. We did in 6606 a satanic high mass with the Center for Inquiry West, which is an atheist place. And our whole point was to mock crazy beliefs, both secular and spiritual. And we try to use ritual for the power of catharsis that it has, but not necessarily, it's certainly not worship. And it's certainly not something done for any kind of spell casting or anything like that. It's primarily psychological. Now, the idea of magic having an effect on people, we know it has an effect on ourselves. So we use magic as psychodrama to change our own perspectives. It's kind of like proactive meditation.
It's cathartic in many ways. I mean, Dr. LeVay's earliest concept for ritual magic was that it would be very cathartic, very much an expression of people's the things they've been keeping inside, the things they've been suppressing. They could come into the ritual chamber and it would be their personal, like, magical laboratory where they could finally say and do all the things that they'd been suppressing in themselves for so long. So he very much saw it as a mental health tool early on.
He even wrote about it that way.
Yeah.
And talked about it in early interviews. Now, we have two kinds of magic. We don't believe in black magic and white magic and gray magic or any of that sort of thing. We have what we call greater and lesser magic. And our lesser magic is basically, it's kind of charm and guile and the way of speaking to people around you to kind of get them to do the things that you want. And it might range from saying the right word at the right time to wearing a scent that might be effective, cooking the right meal for somebody, playing the right music. It's all a way of charming people so that they do things that you'd like them to do. Not forcing them, but bringing them, sort of actively moving them along to do things in your favor. And greater magic is what we'd just been discussing before, the whole ritual format. Now, Anton LaVey didn't disregard the idea that there might be some way that the emotions aroused in ritual could possibly, on some level, be communicated with somebody in, say, a sort of telepathic manner. But that's not something that we consider fundamental to being a Satanist, to have to believe that. Anton LaVey was very interested in the researches that were going on in the 60s. There were a lot of things. I've got volumes on my shelf about Soviet scientists trying to study this. Everybody was trying to get spies that could, telepathically reach across the world.
Remote viewing.
Yeah, remote viewing and all of that. And we find that fascinating, and that there is definitely some interesting evidence for it. There's a guy named Ingo Swann who at one point wrote a book called Natural ESP, and it was an attempt to try to read another person's thoughts, but it really came from an emotional level and a visual, almost graphic level. And we say explore. If you find that you can find evidence for that, then embrace it. And if you don't, then you don't need to.
I mean, we feel strongly that things like we don't put stock in every crazy paranormal concept that comes along, but
or most of them.
or most of them. But telepathy certainly it has a lot of parallels in the animal world. I mean, if you study animals, there's a lot of things that animals seem to have an instinctive sense for. Their instinct goes beyond just smells and their vision and their hearing. Like you watch flocks of birds all turning at the same time, it's hard to imagine that there isn't some kind of thought, there's a thought field that they're all part of. And people like Rupert Sheldrake, his books are very interesting. He has a couple of them. Animals that know when their owners are coming home is one of them. And another one is the sense of being stared at. And the important thing about how Satanism plays with these concepts is that we don't put a spiritual label on them. We don't rely on them. We don't say, well, God gave you this talent, or Satan.
Demons.
Yeah. If you only lit more black candles, you'd be able to read more minds. We don't believe any garbage like that. But we do believe that, that in a lot of human potential that is probably untapped, or may just be may have been left behind when we lived closer to nature and closer to our own and more animal nature.
Also, it might be something that's a specific talent. I'm a musician, I'm a composer. Not everybody can write music and has the ability to do music. And I have friends who are mathematicians. Not everybody can do that. There are people who are athletes. There are people who, can do there's all different human talents. And I think when Sheldrake looks at these things, that different people have different capacities that he's discovered in his evidence gathering. So some people might be talented at being senders or receivers, if at all. So it's open to research, and we keep open minds. We're not the kind of atheist materialists who are very dour and go, nothing like that could be possible. Like it's all known and said and done, and there's a period at the end of the sentence. Our point is that we're always interested in exploring and seeing what other evidence might be out there, and we'd apply whatever works for us.
So it's almost more of a, really it is sort of a sitting within kind of naturalism, I suppose, where, okay, this seems to be the way the natural world works, but there are these cases where, and like you mentioned, some very interesting studies have been done. There are, philosophers of mind and neuroscientists and cognition experts and things who, the question of consciousness has not been solved at all, right? So
no, not at all.
If anything, it's gotten more weirder the more we've been able to play with the brain. So,
right.
It's interesting. So I think one thing that a lot of people have, I guess, as kind of a viewpoint. First, I guess this is actually kind of an interesting question in its own right. Would you consider yourselves to be a religious order, more of a philosophy? Like, how would you describe? It's kind of hard to put a label on, I guess, and maybe you don't want to, but
we're actually fine with calling ourselves a religion because we think most philosophies are, a bunch of abstract concepts and constructs and trying to build sort of thought architecture and are often seeking truths and such. For us, we also employ the idea of metaphor and symbolism, and ritual can be a healthy part of a Satanist life. So with those added dimensions, we would consider ourselves specifically a religion, and that's why we were formed as a church. Rather than just simply being a philosophy, say like objectivism or Marxism or something,
sure.
Wherever you want to go, we definitely have some interesting symbolic metaphors that we play with, and so we're quite comfortable being called a religion.
Okay, so, but so as then a kind of religious viewpoint or religious grouping, right? One thing that's often put with religion are these ideas of a kind of a moral concept, right? And from a naturalist kind of viewpoint, I suppose, would you, obviously, I myself am an atheist, so there's no, we're not the podcast that would think, you need a religious dogma to be moral or anything, right? But I kind of wonder, does the church have explicit or specific views on morals, or is it just simply, again, kind of a, each individual has to make that decision for themselves kind of thing?
It's the latter part,
Sure.
Essentially. What we basically feel is that morals are just a completely arbitrary human construct, that the universe is utterly indifferent to us, and anything that we create is something that we just invent. It has nothing to do. People will try to justify them by all different kinds of either religious or naturalist. See, the naturalists will be saying, well, nature does this, but then they run into the problem that some animals are far more savage. Well, actually, I'd say people are generally more savage than
Sure.
animals. But the goody type people go, well, animals are so horribly savage and we have to be so much better than them. And it's like, we're usually not. And see, for us, we want to be very objective and realistic about things. And our realism, I think, on that point is by saying this is all arbitrary, but that we can employ reason. Reason is something that I think most people have a capacity to engage if they choose to. Not everybody chooses to, as certainly we've seen with a lot of people of faith. So if you can engage reason and come together with the people with whom you're living in a society, whether it's a small community, a tribe, or a nation, or a globe, I think we can rationally come up with modes of interacting that we would all find equitable. And since we're individualists and we promote our pleasure and our pursuit of ourselves and being the best selves that we can be, we would like to have modes of interaction that also promote that, not live in some sort of theocracy or any kind of, or even some kind of, secular dictatorship that pushes you in particular directions or enslaves you to anybody. So ultimately, our basic position is that we're trying to find the maximum amount of freedom without impinging on other people's rights, to seek their own destinies.
So I'm curious with the ideal of ritual, because how I think of ritual is more of a repetitive action, or it is.
Yeah, that's not how we look at it at all.
Yeah,
Okay,
and that's just a problem with like nomenclature at this point.
Yeah, because that is
what we refer to as a ritual is
Mhm.
working. We go into the ritual chamber, we work our black magic, and it's working. It's a working. It's not just every morning I light a green candle so that I'll get money.
The whole point is for us is you got to release your emotions in that format, and you let them go.
Right.
You don't go back and do it over and over again.
No.
That would be defeating the purpose.
Yeah, you're not very good because you have to keep repeating it. So you got to do it right the first time.
So the reason I bring up sort of the idea of repetition and the idea of the ritual, and to me, a ritual is you are enacting something that is helping guide you towards a certain outcome, whether it's repetition or whether it's whatever it is. That ritual is almost like a mantra or a chant. It can be so many things, but I, again, on a daily basis, I look at it almost as I battle between free will, because I like to think I have a certain amount of free will. I have a certain amount of autonomy and able to make decisions and think rationally, think clearly. But I also know I park in the same place in the parking garage, right? I know that if over a certain course of time, I will inevitably fall into sort of repetitive habits. So I'm kind of curious because I think people in general have this certain almost innate draw of it is not yoked upon them, but is sort of the comfort in a repetition or the comfort in revisiting something. So how do you balance that? Or is there a balance between that and something like free will, which would be considered sort of this, the eternal fire of, being able to, I'm trying to remember my Nietzschean stuff and it's not coming to me. The eternal recurrence that you're going to, if I had to do it all again, I would do it completely differently, or I will disrupt myself to remake myself into something else. And how much of that is actually repetition?
Well, see, we don't look at it like that at all. So that entire paradigm doesn't work for us. The idea of repetition to me would be something like practicing scales so you build up the muscle memory so you can play them easier, or practicing when I vocalize, because I'm a musician, I'm a singer, I'm a keyboardist, I'm a percussionist. I do all of these things, but I don't see that as ritual. It's simply a tool to get to a result that I want. We can, of course, create patterns, but it depends on why you're creating the patterns. If you park in the same parking spot, is it a good parking spot? Is it easy to get to? Can you get your car in and out of it more easily? Like it all depends on why you're doing these things rather than that you are doing them. There's always a choice. And we of course, go for free will as being a given. We don't debate that in Satanism. We accept that as being part of our nature. And I'm sure that at some point we'll biologically and mathematically be able to figure out how that actually functions, because we do not believe we're in a mechanistic universe, that there's certainly enough chaotic aspects to things that, and our consciousness clearly plays a role in part of that. I think that we really feel that, you never dip your toe into the river twice in the same place, and that you're constantly evolving forward. And that you might create some sort of structure in your life by creating things that repeat, because it can give you confidence or it makes things easier. But there's always an evolution to things, and we kind of see life as surfing. Those waves are constantly changing, and you have to be able to adapt to them.
Well, that's sort of, I think kind of the distinction you made that was the interesting one, or the important one there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would take it to be that the position would be that normally a religious ritual which is repetitive, has no viable outcome, has no pragmatic response, right? So
exactly, it's just for security, I think, for most people, and so that's really not part of how we view things.
Sure,
we wouldn't do that.
Right. So it's more of when you mention ritual, to me it sounds more like that. Like you keep mentioning, that kind of cathartic response, or that letting go of these emotions by, whatever it is that you do inside the chamber, let's say.
Sure, and that's totally up to each individual as well. Yeah, Anton LaVey in the Satanic Bible provided 3 basic ritual structures and some texts that one can use, but that's not something that one is bound to. That we absolutely, he did from the very start encourage people to find whatever parts of those felt enriching and exciting, and to run with it and change your ritual into whatever way that actually is the most emotionally effective for each individual Satanist.
So one question I guess I have, because you mentioned just now this idea of determinism versus, say, this idea of free will, right? And this is one that I often I myself kind of puzzle over this constantly, right? I mean, I think anyone that, every philosophy graduate, right? Every philosophy student gets to the part of the class where they're just like, oh my goodness, what? I'm a machine, it happens to all of us. So,
well, I decided years ago that was a waste of time.
Well, see, so that's the part that I wonder about here is,
I was about 8 years old when I made that decision.
See, but
so
what if though?
You see, the reason I think that is because you, in order to be responsible for your actions, you have to have free will. That's a basic part of our philosophy. That you are completely and utterly responsible for all of your actions, your successes, and your failures. So the idea of it being deterministic, I think that's just a fun concept that certain people come up with because they want to feel that they have they either want to have no responsibility, or they want to feel that there's a predestination and something that controls them.
See, but
I think actual freedom scares people.
Well, this idea, though, of responsibility, though, if we are in a universe without a God, if we are in a universe where morals are completely determined by yourself, then who are you responsible to, right? I mean, you get
yourself.
Right.
You're responsible to yourself and the people that you care for. It's it's a social contract.
Right. That's okay. And so that's I think the part where, so it is in that sense, I guess, a very existential kind of philosophy that you're espousing, right? This idea that, you could, you're only responsible to yourself. Well, then there is really, again, that you get to that whole existential hero conundrum, right? There is nothing to hold you back from doing whatever you want. If you don't feel bad about it, then who cares, right?
Well, I think that's the actual truth, that's really how people behave.
Right.
And then I think acknowledging that takes some balls. And that also means you have to create rules in society, and you need laws, and you need people to enforce them. You have to actually create a social structure if you're going to live with other people. And that's just, it's pragmatic. It's how our species is. We look at our species, how we behave, and we flow with that.
It's interesting. So I wonder.
Also, I think trying to shoehorn Satanism into any of these pre-existing philosophies is doesn't work. Anton LaVey didn't look at any particular philosophy and say, I'm a descendant of this one. Because then we look, there are Epicureanism in us, there are aspects of Nietzsche in us. There's, you look at so many different people. You can look at things that, Hobbes said, and you could look at people, so many, Spencer and Locke, all of these people have aspects that can be pulled into Satanism. But I think it's a unique tapestry that doesn't see itself as being particularly descended from any of these. It's not trying to live up to any of their percepts or any of their decisions. It's something sui generis, even though it has roots.
Sure, absolutely.
So, do you think, culturally, do you feel that when do people have more genuine interest and you find more interest in the church than other times? I'm just sort of curious, what is the social reflection that comes down that lets people, one, become more interested, and two, actually hear what you're saying versus other times that are not? Because I could make some assumptions like, oh, well, now we are living more in a society that is, there's much more upheaval and change and tribal instincts being drawn. So perhaps, people are not going to hear alternative alternative messages out there. But again, like, that's my assumption. I'm just sort of curious because I think as an individual, I think being able to separate yourself from the idea of determinism is hard to do, but it's also hard to instill and discuss with others and have rapport with others. So culturally and sociologically, are there times that works better, or does that make sense? It's sort of like
I think it comes down to
free floating
like
question.
when is the pamphlet drive the best? Is that kind of way like?
Well, we don't proselytize at all. We never have.
Okay.
Basically, our approach has always been to have this information available to anyone who seeks it on their own, which is why we are not interested in indoctrinating children. We're not trying to force Satanism in schools because the material is readily available. We have a vast website that has all of this free material, and then there are books that take it in depth. Many books translate into many different languages. Mm-hmm. So we expect people to get off their lazy asses and do some reading. That's our whole point.
But do you find that there's culturally times that people are more interested? I mean,
the Church of Satan was formed during a time in the 60s that they referred to as the occult revolution.
Sure.
And there was a lot of other thought forms out there too, and Satanism was one of them. It was quite different from most of the witchy kind of things that were out there. A lot of like Sibylique and astrology and white magic and all of that was going on.
And they were all the Eastern religions people.
Yeah.
See, that the 60s was a time when people were breaking through from the 50s, at least in the United States, particularly in a lot of Western countries, was really kind of locked down and very Christian and very conservative. And suddenly all of those paradigms were shattered and younger people were looking for different alternatives. Are there other ways of life?
And they were seeking things that they could come to themselves, that came out of themselves, rather than from an authoritative church or institution.
Something with like concrete dogmas that were meant to not be questioned. So questioning was the basis for things in the 60s. And I think that, for the Church of Satan, we've never stopped growing. People have been coming to us. You see, we see Satanists as something, you're naturally a Satanist. You're somebody who questions things, somebody who feels that you are the captain of your own destiny. You are not looking for somebody to bow down to, either a political or a religious figure. And I basically think, and I think Anton LaVey shared this with me, is that those are the two kind of people. That some people naturally feel that they need to acquiesce to something or someone, and that they are subservient. And there are other people who that is absolutely anathema to them, and that they feel that they must control their own destiny and make their own decisions. And I think those basic two streams of human evolution, they do coexist. But I think that the one kind are the kind that we find Satanists in, and other kind of free thinkers. And the rest are more herd people. We call them the herd. They're sheep. They need to be shepherded. And we don't think that everybody can be a Satanist at all. We don't think that if you educate them, suddenly they'll become Satanists. We think that naturally they would find it harmful to them because they feel a need to be guided. There's some people who naturally feel that. And we don't have the hubris of telling them, no, you must go out on your own and make your own life and be totally responsible for all these things on your own, because those people can't do it.
Hmm.
Do you think that this doesn't exist in everyone?
No, it doesn't exist in everyone. Absolutely not.
So
don't believe that at all.
Do you?
Even if it's our natural state?
What is our natural state? I think there are two different natural states. You see, I think that's the problem with a lot of atheists, is that you think everybody could be an atheist if they just turned on their brain and thought logically. I don't think that that's true. I think that a number of people really can't actually employ logic, and that their emotions are only satisfied when they are subservient to being dominated and being given thoughts to put in their own heads.
Well, no, I was saying that if we are naturally animals, we are animals. To your point, it is a carnal nature. Then we should have some element of being able to see this and be a Satanist in everyone.
No, we don't think that.
No,
we don't think that.
So
because we've seen the evidence. We've watched people over 50 years. And there are a number of people who look at Satanism, and to them, it's just something that's absolutely anathema, because a philosophy that tells you that you must be completely responsible for yourself, that you have to be self-determined, and that your successes and failures are on your own head, that's too much for a lot of people. They would much rather abdicate that to somebody else.
No one is up there in the sky. There's no scoreboard in the sky. There's no one watching you. There's no one who cares about your destiny.
And you find that in Eastern religions with karma, we think that's foolish.
You very much have to care yourself.
Mm.
Yeah,
you are the one who gives your life significance, not God, not your relationship to a higher being.
Or to society. You have to determine it yourself.
So
yeah, I mean, I've had conversations with people who, when they finally get it and they understand what our philosophy is, they say, if I believed that, I couldn't get up in the morning. And I say, if I believed what you believe, I couldn't either.
If I can ask a pop culture question.
Sure.
Do you, what are your opinions, or have you seen The Good Place? The sitcom The Good Place.
Oh, I've never heard of it. I'm not a pop culture person. I don't listen to any pop music. I only listen to classical music and film scores, and I write classical music. I despise most pop culture. So,
well, a few of my Satanist friends have recommended it. I think it's funny.
So, tell us about it.
So, well, I probably won't do it too much justice. It's interesting because it's the premise of a woman wakes up and she is hypothetically in heaven. But she realizes that she is there by mistake. So she doesn't know if they're going to catch on, or she doesn't know if she's going to get kicked out or what the ramifications are. And so she is befriended by someone who was a moral philosopher on earth, who is in heaven as well, and who begins to teach her, on what is good and what is bad, and how to be a morally just person. And so the first season ends, and spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you this because you're probably not going to watch it anyways. But spoiler alert, and Chris, if you've seen it or if you haven't seen it, you should watch it.
Plug your ears.
Plug your ears. So end of the first season, the end episode, it dawns on her that she's not in heaven. She's actually in hell. And it's the inversion of, like, she's been, the experiment was to put these people together that have these very different ideas of things, and they will become each other's punishment.
Well, hell is other people, right? Sartre wrote that already.
Hell is other people. So, and it kind of goes from there. And can people change? Are you born into something a certain way? What happens to you if you are around other people that have similar thoughts or different thoughts? It's a very interesting show, and I just had to ask.
So
what's funny about it is it sounds like she feels guilty, and
she doesn't. She's fearful. Well, she's fearful because she's like, I don't want to physically, like, the one thing that she gets maybe a little bit of the guilt, but it's much more of the idea of being found out as a phony and being exposed, which is probably just another type of guilt.
The thing that's very funny is she's, the minute that she's like, am I supposed to be here? It's like, boom, questions God's will. To hell. Like that should have been her initial, her initial logic check. Like, am I questioning God's will? I am. Well, then this can't be heaven because I'd be down in hell.
Well, they have an entire episode on that, man.
Interesting.
You would think it's hysterical. And you know what? Ted Danson's in it. Oh man, you got me. So
is
what?
He God?
Yeah, wait, is he God? Who plays God?
No, God does not have God does not come up.
Ridiculous. All right, so okay. So a similar question actually I had, I guess, on the pop culture thing. Although so a lot of the symbols, I guess, and you had mentioned earlier that you kind of have started to shy away from some of that stuff, the symbolism of the Judeo-Christian Satan or a Baphomet or whatever, right? But I kind of wonder, and this is maybe more of just a general question for you both, is just people, right? But one really interesting philosophy that's always stuck with me throughout my kind of readings and studies and whatever is the idea of so Adorno and Horkheimer wrote The Dialectic of Enlightenment, right? And so this idea of any counterculture, and this was written about or partially inspired hippie protests at their Adorno and Horkheimer's offices. But the idea is that in a capitalist society, right, any countercultural movement, any movement against the status quo, the way things are, will eventually be swallowed by capitalism and, for lack of a better word, defecated back out in a bastardized fashion. And so you'll start with something like, the hippie movement or whatever, that's a counterculture protest to whatever. And then, in 20 years, they're selling hippie tees at Urban Outfitters.
Right. Everybody's wearing Che Guevara shirts.
Exactly.
And it's really kind of yawn.
Right. And so I actually kind of wonder with that, right, in pop culture today, I mean, we hear this joke a lot, but, being kind of occult inspired or being kind of anti very, I guess, sort of shocking in a religious context, right? You're shocking the squares by wearing a shirt that says, I don't know, Jesus is my homeboy or something silly, right? Like, I wonder, has the church or as just kind of, I guess, first off, explain your use of the symbols, like why use those symbols? And then if it is losing power, or if it is losing some kind of, some of that bite today in a world where, a lot of those symbols are being used in pop culture in a positive kind of way.
Are you asking us what we think about Hot Topic Satanists?
Don't get me started on Hot Topic. That is a very powerful discussion on this podcast. Marie and I have gone into it. I mean, kind of. Right? Kind of.
That's what this is about. It's about our Baphomet showing up on a whole bunch of T-shirts at Hot Topic or some of those other stores. American something?
Who knows? It's just shabby, watering down of things.
I mean, it's bound to happen. It comes not just through occultism, but through
anything
music.
It happens in everything, right? Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Well, anything that you come out with that is iconoclastic will eventually be turned into pablum.
Absolutely.
That's just what cultures do. And it's not just capitalism, it's any culture.
Kits. Like the witches didn't think much of that either.
Yeah, they were kind of pissed off at Sephora recently.
But we're hardly the ones to object. And we're telling you right now that we don't believe in the supernatural and we don't believe in a higher power. So these are symbols that resonate with us, and it's hard to turn around and then tell people, well, they can't resonate with you. They can only resonate with us.
That's true.
Well, yeah, but also what we're going to find too is that things constantly evolve, and that our use of symbolism is always based on what we think might actually be effective. Anton LaVey specifically wrote about the concept of the Black Mass in the 60s, and people were thinking, well, of course, the Black Mass is, desecrating a consecrated host and turning crosses upside down and all that sort of nonsense. He said that, but if you wanted an effective Black Mass circa 1966, you would crush an LSD-laced sugar cube underfoot and invert pictures of Timothy Leary. And so it's something that, Satanism knows that. We've known that from the start. Like, we came into it with that idea. That's at the point that he created. Satan means adversary, and we are the adversaries to spiritual religions, both Eastern and Western. So essentially, we're ready to be adversarial when need be. Because that's how you are effective. You look at where the culture is going and what's swinging, and you use whatever you need to communicate an idea. Of course, everything will get watered down in time, and then it'll get forgotten. See, we talk in our sins about forgetfulness of past orthodoxies. And the idea is that things rise and people are concerned with them, and they're all hot about them. And then something else comes up, and then something else, and something else. And the other orthodoxy is gone. It's forgotten. And then at a later point, one can revive it in a way that will again be shocking. So it's the flow of culture and society, and we're completely aware of it and willing to, again, serve.
So another semi-pop culture question. Sorry, this is our frame of reference, but it's relevant to what you're saying. So just this last week, Sotheby's had their contemporary art sale. They sold a Banksy. The hammer came down for American dollars, $1.4 million. And as soon as it came down and gone, something in the frame turned on and it began to shred. It began to shred the print itself. So what would be a Satanist's take or opinion on on Banksy.
Well, first off, just quick, did you guys see did you see the Onion article, which was I think it was just a picture of an artist on fire, and it said Banksy explodes into flames while cashing booby trapped check. Yeah,
the Onion is often apt with such things.
Oh, they're wonderful. Anyway, sorry.
Asking what a Satanist would think of Banksy is, again, every Satanist could have a different opinion on Banksy. A lot of Satanists would be like,
your opinion.
Yeah, it's bullshit. So I was in the art world for 18 years, working in a major gallery in the city. And so I dealt with contemporary and historical art. So I'm very familiar with all the things that have been done with that for rather a while. And Banksy, I think, it all depends on how the person feels who spent the money. Are they pissed off? I think it was funny.
You assumed that there was someone who bought it.
Well, I don't know. I didn't really follow this specifically. So if somebody paid for it, maybe they like the notoriety of having the piece that's self-destructed. If this is the first one, that's notoriety. They've bought notoriety. That could be something that is functioning. They could be pissed off because, now I have to either tape it together or just put it in a wastebasket. It's like, maybe it won't look so good in my hallway. I was going to put it over the toilet, and now it's not going to work. It'll have to be in the garbage can in the bathroom.
Yeah. But even the idea of pastiche and taking a symbol and making it so mechanicalized that it no longer means what it was supposed to mean is one of the things that I thought, that just sort of popped in my head when you were speaking about it, is that's really what he's done. But even in him doing that, he's become coveted. It's become what has been that somebody will pay that much money for. And is it more of an act of rebellion and being adversarial to shred that art, or is it even more of a commodification?
I'd actually say it's more of a commodification. It's just trying to be chic and cutting edge.
And it's a publicity stunt.
Yeah, it's like, yay, I got publicity. Everybody's stirred up about it. People who don't even care about art are going, oh, did you hear about that painting that got shredded?
Yeah, I watched the video of it happening. They put that up. And what struck me the most was how every single one of the people in that audience just picked up their smartphones and started filming it.
Right.
The little sheep.
They wanted
sheep all filming it for their Facebook page.
Yeah.
Well, and isn't that the actual, then maybe that's the actual art. Right? That's the actual thing that he was getting to, is he was getting to that you're going to film this. It will become the commodity. The commodity is now everywhere. It's almost like a viral thing.
Yep. No, he clearly understands how the contemporary culture works. It's a media-centric culture, and everybody is just a drone following whatever, like Firefly is going in front of their eye at the moment. And he got to be that at that moment. So yay, Banksy. Good for him.
So kind of turn into the original point of our why we originally reached out to you both.
Yes, sorry, we have a point.
We do. Well, yeah, we always have one. It takes us a while to get there, but we always eventually do get there. So I think a big thing that's kind of clouded the public's judgment or a view, and I think very unfairly. I mean, obviously, just based on what the actual belief system is, right? Is the satanic panic, right, of the 1980s. One thing that I've noticed, at least personally online, which I find fascinating, is that the idea of the satanic panic is interesting because we talk about it as if it was a one-time thing, right? That this happened in the 80s for a little bit, late 70s to the early 90s, and it's kind of gone away. But you just go onto any internet forum of conspiracy theory or kind of paranormal viewpoints or whatever, and there are people who swear that I was abducted by whatever, and brainwashed and all this other ridiculousness, right? But I wonder though, because so what was, I guess, the church's official response to those satanic panic issues? Because really, I mean, frankly, you read books like, say, Michelle Remembers or whatever, which we will be ragging on that, for an entire episode soon here. The ridiculousness of a psychiatrist marrying his patient and then turning her story into a wonderful bestseller for himself. So I guess what was the church's position during that? How did you respond to that kind of, just straight out falsehood?
Well, I did probably over 200 talk shows to blast that foolish idea.
Sure, yeah.
The thing is, what made the Satanic Panic unique is that the major media was promoting it as something valid and actual.
Right.
Geraldo was doing show every other week. If he wasn't doing skinhead Nazis, he was doing, evil Satanists. So that was his bread and butter for a while. And of course, he did apologize for it afterwards. But everybody was doing it. I did so many audio shows all over the world. I was doing them in Ireland, Italy, and Japan. And just constantly we had to address the fact that there was no conspiracy of Satanists out there trying to take over the world. And I mean, of course, it was completely absurd. The idea that it went from people putting graffiti under like highway bridges to like generals like hooked up to Satan and people being teleported by demons. I mean, it was completely absurd. And that, I did, there was this show that we did, it was 2 hours. Christina was the largest Spanish language talk show. It was done in LA. And I was taken out there to explain all of this. And Christina caught it right away. That these people were basically buying into a fantasy that primarily was being promoted by evangelical Christians. That it started with that, after they jumped on that. I mean, the whole mercenary idea of creating the Michelle Remembers nonsense was like, I wanted a bestseller. Here's something shocking. Mike Warnke, who was a Christian, followed up with his book, The Satan Seller, and then it kept going. But after that, there were then the people who could also make money on it by pretending to be experts and consultants. So you get people who are peripherally involved with law enforcement, trying to teach police departments. They'd buy a bunch of crap at the local occult store and go, we found these at a ritual site. And they charge, $75 a head to get like 300 cops in a room and tell them a bunch of bullshit. So a lot of people profited off of that. The people who were then became therapists, who were trying to say that children were all being abused. And then, of course, the McMartin trial started because some absolutely crazy alcoholic woman started making these claims about tunnels underneath a daycare center. But I mean, it got really absurd. It was so logically insane to anybody who's looked into it that of course it should have stopped immediately because it was grotesque. But people were in this frenzy because sort of urban legend flow of ideas then became promoted by the mass media, and all these people were there to try to profit from it. So it really became a cottage industry that helped a lot of people make a lot of money. Of course, a lot of them now have to pay it back or are being sued. So lawsuits don't end.
Right, yeah.
But, but Peggy can tell you about how Anton LaVey directly dealt with Michelle Remembers.
Oh, well, they sued them. They sued the author. They sued the publishing company. They sued the distributor of the book because the original edition of Michelle Remembers has photographs in it with locations, and it says right on the captions, Church of Satan. This is where the Church of Satan did all their rituals. This is the northwestern headquarters of the Church of Satan. So they sued them for defamation, and it was a very interesting experience for them because basically what the opposition, the defense, came up with as like they had this mini pointed, like this forked defense where they said on the one hand, this is all just a work of, nobody says they really believed what's in this book. It's just an expression of her memories. Like they wouldn't swear to it. No one's swearing to the factual nature of what's in this book.
Despite that's how it was presented.
And
right,
then
absolutely.
on the other hand,
well, that's like Alex Jones saying he's a performance artist.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And on the other hand, you're a Satanist, and we can't defame you.
You're already defamed by saying you're a Satanist.
Because you're a Satanist. So
they literally both of those things in the trial. They literally tried to push both of those things simultaneously.
Ridiculous. It's I mean, so it's what's in, so what's really interesting to me is it's in some ways coming back, this viewpoint, right? It's not gone as serious, let's say, as, trials and things of that nature. But I mean, I have, I have a bad habit of buying self-published books by people who claim they've either been abducted by aliens or abducted by cults, right? My wife one day will, I'm sure that'll be the first line in the divorce proceedings, right? Like, look at his closet. It's ridiculous. But,
that's unless she gets crushed by those books falling.
That's true. The hoarding defense, that's a good one. But I mean, have you ever had anyone contact you, I suppose, or has there ever been any kind of concerns for your own safety or anything? I mean, because really some of this stuff, I'm thinking there's one book in particular I been reading it, and this person claims, my entire town was full of cultists who worshipped Satan and whatever, and I mean, I think the public just generally, because of the association of the name, puts the two together, and I wonder, I mean, has that led to any kind of scary situations for either of you, or?
There were tons of scary situations for the LeVay family.
Sure, yeah.
Before we even were running this thing, they had put the earliest the organizational material and publicity and everything about the Church of Satan for years had their home address on it. Everything went to their home address. So there were always people showing up and doing stuff. That's why, they wound up with a fence with barbed wire on it. Yeah, their home was attacked all the time. Their cars were attacked on the street.
They were vandalized. Their house was shot at.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So, yeah, they got all kinds of threats. And, that's just something they learned to live with.
Mm-hmm.
They had guards outside a lot of the time, and Halloween was not a fun day out there because, roving cars full of kids would be going by because they want to see what's going on at the Church of Satan. And so a lot of eggs and
rocks
like that would be happening. Yeah.
See, we're fortunate because we're so out in the open about who we are. And that there's so much information that one can get simply by Googling, as our Twitter will tell people to do, or just read our FAQ.
Sure.
There are more people who, if they're interested in it at all, that they can find out what it is. And again, people they always approach and say, well, you've been covered unfairly. And it's like, actually not. Since I've done literally, probably 1,000 hours or so of media over the years, I get plenty of information out there, and Anton LaVey did before me, and our other spokespeople do today. Our Twitter feed does. So we've got plenty of information out there for anybody who actually wants to know what we're about. Mm-hmm. And our house, if you've seen pictures, it's, a very large, place that people can see. People come by and take pictures of it. When Halloween comes around, we give out candy to the trick-or-treaters, and our block, our friend down the street, we call his house more the Munsters house, and ours is more of the Addams family house. But we get people come from miles around to be here and get candy because
they do.
We're like a
so
real
cool.
rock. So people are well disposed towards us for the most part. I mean, I'd be surprised if we went into a wine store and suddenly says, oh, you're in the free handout paper today, and there's like a picture of me, a picture of my house. It's giving the address, and but nobody's coming by to shoot at me. But the other thing, too, is I consult for law enforcement, and I have for years, and Anton LaVey did as well. So I have direct lines to people from, state, local, and national who could help me if anything, threatening actually turns out.
Sure.
So we'll be protected. And we are armed legally, and I can carry. So there's also that, too. Anton LaVey was, too. So, we take our self-defense seriously and responsibly. But we also deal with the authorities, but I think mostly is that we don't run around being like we're terrifying and scary people who do horrible things. We're kind of affable folk, and that we're unusual. But I think at this point, especially when you look at the Hot Topic and things, and all these people doing this stuff, everybody kind of wants to be a Satanist, especially on Halloween. So it seems to be it's balanced out kind of nicely over the years.
Sure, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it has just been absolutely fascinating having you both on. If you're ever in the Twin Cities, got to take you out for a drink sometime. We can.
I was just there.
Were you really? Oh.
I was there for the state fair.
Oh my goodness! How'd you like it?
I loved it. It was a whole bunch of fun.
Oh my goodness!
Scotch on a stick. Yay!
Yeah, it's so good. Oh my goodness! My favorite every year. I always we do the same thing. We've been going now just only for the last 2 years because when we moved up here, but I've created it my own line of defenses, or my own line of attack, I should say. It's, you go get a giant corn dog, you go get some cheese curds, and then you go find the nearest place for beer, and you just kind of, you wait it out until you can go get cookies.
Yep. Yes, I did all that.
So
I
good.
did all that.
Oh my goodness.
I watched all the equestrian stuff, and I went and looked at all the chickens and the little baby pigs, and Minneapolis was a lot of fun. Have you ever been to the Axeman stores?
No, actually,
they're really cool. You should go to one of them. There's 3 of them.
Okay,
in your city.
We'll have to check that out. I'm writing it down now. Well, any kind of, I guess, last minute things you'd like to say, I guess, to the listeners, or I don't know.
Your listeners are more secular people, correct?
They are certainly more secular, I would say.
Right. See, one thing that we find that people try to misread about us is that our philosophy is one of indulgence, not compulsion. And they try to paint us as being sort of base hedonists. And we're Epicureans in that we look at all kinds of things that bring us pleasure, from intellectual pursuits to carnal pursuits to, basis to the highest, that can bring us fulfillment and satisfaction, but dealt with in a moderation sense so that we are not locked into any kind of compulsion. If you go too far with anything, then it becomes a problem. And so we look to fulfill ourselves with indulging in all different things in rational moderation.
So maybe you should try and watch The Good Place.
It sounds fun. Although, to me, the way it began to present it sounds like guilt fest. And, we are guilt-free. That's one of the wonderful things about being a Satanist, is that our lives are guilt-free.
And we are not sponsored by The Good Place.
We
not. Promise.
We don't have any. We don't show for any corporate.
Oh my goodness!
So somebody, is there going to be a new one called The Bad Place?
Yeah.
Well, that's what it turns out to be. It's anyways. I won't say anything more.
Good and bad are all relative. You see, that's the wonderful thing. It's like some people might find it heaven, and some people might find it hell.
That's what you say to be Epicurious. I'm giving a sell up for the pop culture.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. Anytime you want to come back on, let us know, please. We'd love to have you anytime. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. And also, we'd like to encourage people to read our FAQ and follow our Twitter feed. And we have a lot of essays on the website, churchofsatan.com, that can really give you some very intriguing food for thought if you like reading.
Yeah, you'll be there all day.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. And we'll put a link here with the show notes as well.
Thanks so much.
Cool. No problem. All right. Well, that's it now. Thank you guys seriously so much again. We're so excited to have gotten you on the show. It's really been great and such a pleasure talking to you both. We'll be in contact again, let you know. We're expecting that this will come out sometime next week. But like I said, I'll get the raw files. I'll send them over to you via Dropbox or Google Drive, whichever one is probably Google Drive, because more people use that. And yeah,
or just use, how big are the files usually?
They're usually quite big because they're high they're high level audio files. So usually
go ahead.
Yeah, no, usually too big for Google. Just to send via email, but
we use WeTransfer a lot for things.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can get that to go too. Perfect. Okay.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks again.
Okay.
Good night,
Thank you guys.
Have a
good night.
Have a great evening.
Bye. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see. If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.